6 Ways to Defeat Disrespect. An inner steel script. Cold open, first 3 seconds. A Roman general is standing in front of his mutinous soldiers. They're screaming at him, threatening him. One man throws his helmet at his feet. Marcus Aurelius doesn't flinch. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't reach for his sword. He simply waits, and when the screaming stops, he speaks one sentence that silences every single man in that field. That one moment changed the course of Roman history. And in the next few minutes, you're going to learn exactly what he did, and why it will change the way people treat you for the rest of your life. Intro. Disrespect is everywhere. In the way someone talks over you in a meeting. In the dismissive tone of a colleague who thinks they know better. In the friend who cancels on you at the last minute for the 5th time. In the stranger who cuts you off, the boss who takes credit for your work, the family member who belittles your dreams at the dinner table. And if you're watching this, you've felt it. That hot flush of anger. That sting of humiliation. That quiet question that follows you home. Why do they keep treating me like this? Most men respond to disrespect in one of 2 broken ways. They either explode and lose themselves, their credibility, their power, or they say nothing, swallow it, and walk away smaller than they arrived. Neither of those is strength. Real strength is something different. It's a skill. It's a discipline. It's the thing that separates men who are respected everywhere they go from men who are treated like furniture. And today, Inner Steel is giving you 6 ways to defeat disrespect, not by fighting harder, but by becoming the kind of man who doesn't need to. Stay with me. Because what you're about to learn has been tested on battlefields, in prison cells, in boardrooms, and in the quiet rooms where history was made. Let's begin. Point 1. Respond, never react. In 1944, Viktor Frankl was in a Nazi concentration camp. He had nothing. They had taken his family, his manuscript, his clothes, his name. Every day, guards would scream at him, humiliate him, use him like an animal. The cruelty was designed to strip him of his humanity. But Frankl discovered something extraordinary in the middle of that darkness. He wrote later, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our freedom." They could control everything, except that space. Disrespect is a stimulus. It comes at you fast, hard, and loaded with the intention to destabilize you. The person who disrespects you is counting on your reaction. They want to see you flinch, snap, lose your temper, say something stupid. Because the moment you react, you hand them your power on a silver platter. The first way to defeat disrespect is to refuse to react, and choose your response. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. This is the hardest and most powerful thing a man can do in a heated moment. It requires tremendous internal discipline. It requires that you know yourself well enough to pause before you speak. Frankl called this the last human freedom, the freedom to choose your own response to any situation. Circumstances can take everything from you. They cannot take that. When someone disrespects you, your nervous system fires. Adrenaline spikes. Your jaw tightens. Your hands want to move. This is biology. This is normal. But you are not your biology. You are the man standing above it. Take a breath. Slow your heart rate. In that pause, that one deliberate pause, you shift from prey to predator. You move from reaction to intention. And suddenly, you are the most powerful person in the room. The guard who screamed at Viktor Frankl in that camp held no real power over him. Because Frankl refused to let the screaming inside. That is your first weapon against disrespect. The space between what happens to you and what you decide to do about it. Guard it. Develop it. Practice it every single day. Because the man who controls his response controls every room he walks into. Point 2. Silence is a sword. In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte sat across from a man named Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, his own foreign minister, a man he trusted completely. Talleyrand had been secretly working against him. Napoleon discovered the betrayal. And when he confronted Talleyrand in front of his entire court, he erupted. He screamed. He called him a traitor, a coward, a disgrace. He said things so severe that men standing nearby couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Talleyrand stood there, completely still. He said nothing. He barely moved his face. After Napoleon stormed out, Talleyrand turned to the room and said quietly, "What a pity that such a great man should be so badly brought up." Napoleon had power. But in that moment, Talleyrand owned the room. Here is what most men don't understand about silence. It is not absence. It is presence. It is weight. When someone disrespects you and you respond with silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of a man who has absolutely nothing to prove, you unsettle them in ways words never could. Words are expected. A comeback is expected. A raised voice is expected. What no one expects is the man who simply looks at them, says nothing, and lets the disrespect fall at their feet like a stone dropped in still water. The second way to defeat disrespect is to master the power of strategic silence. This means knowing when not to speak. It means understanding that your silence sends a message louder than any sentence. I am not moved by you. I do not need to defend myself. What you just said is beneath a response. Here's the thing about disrespect: it feeds on reaction. It is parasitic. It grows when it gets the response it's looking for. Starve it of that response, and it withers. The person who tried to diminish you is left standing in the wreckage of their own words. Silence is also a mirror. When you say nothing and simply hold a person's gaze, they are forced to hear themselves. They are forced to sit with what they just said. And often, far more often than you'd expect, they are the first to break. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change." He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to win. He simply needed to be unmoved by the noise. Develop your silence. Make it comfortable. Make it powerful. Make it so deliberate that people feel it the moment it descends. Because a man who controls his tongue controls his enemies. Point 3. Boundaries without apology. In 1964, a young Muhammad Ali was preparing for his first heavyweight title fight. The press didn't believe in him. They mocked him. They called him arrogant, untested, foolish. Before the fight, Sonny Liston, the champion, the intimidator, a man who had knocked out opponents in the first round, sat across from Ali at the weigh-in and tried to stare him down. Ali didn't back up. He leaned forward. He smiled. He spoke at full volume with full confidence, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of a man who had already decided who he was. When someone asked Ali before the fight if he was worried, he said, "I've already wrestled with an alligator, tussled with a whale. Only last week I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick." He wasn't performing bravado. He was drawing a line. And everyone who crossed that line found out the same thing. Ali meant every word. The third way to defeat disrespect is to establish clear, unapologetic boundaries, and enforce them. Most men who suffer chronic disrespect have one thing in common: they have never clearly communicated what they will and will not accept. They hope people will figure it out. They wait for people to treat them better on their own. They swallow insult after insult, and wonder why nothing changes. Nothing changes because you haven't made it change. A boundary is not a wall. It is not aggression. It is information. It tells the world, this is who I am, and this is how I am to be treated. It is simply the truth of your self-respect made visible. And here is the key: a boundary only works if you enforce it. Without consequence, a boundary is just a word. And words without action teach people that you don't mean what you say. You don't need to deliver a boundary with anger. You don't need to lecture. You don't need to explain yourself for 10 minutes. You simply state it, calm, clear, direct, and then you hold it. "I won't be spoken to that way. That doesn't work for me. If that continues, I'm leaving." And then, you follow through. Ali drew his line in front of the entire world. And when the fight started, he backed it up with everything he had. The world never questioned him again. You don't have to fight like Ali. But you do have to be willing to stand where you said you'd stand. Because the moment you enforce a boundary, calmly, without apology, you become a man who means what he says. And men who mean what they say get treated differently. They get treated with respect. Point 4. Become unignorable. In the early 1900s, a young, unknown architect named Frank Lloyd Wright was constantly dismissed by the establishment. He had no credentials from the right schools. He didn't work with the right firms. Prominent figures in architecture openly mocked his ideas as impractical and egotistical. He didn't argue with them. He didn't fight for their approval. He didn't beg for recognition. He built. While others debated him, he designed Falling Water, a house built over a waterfall, defying every convention the establishment held sacred. He designed the Guggenheim Museum. He created an entirely new architectural language that would outlast every one of his critics by a century. By the time the world caught up to Frank Lloyd Wright, his work had made the argument for him. The fourth way to defeat disrespect is to make yourself impossible to ignore through excellence. This is the long game. And it is the most devastating response to disrespect that has ever existed. When someone dismisses you, diminishes you, questions your worth, the nuclear response is not words. It is results. It is becoming so undeniably excellent at what you do that your critics are left with nothing to say. Here is the truth that most men aren't told: the world doesn't always respond to your explanations. It doesn't always respond to your arguments. But it always responds to results. It always responds to the man who simply keeps building while others keep talking. Excellence is a language every human being understands. It cuts through bias, politics, doubt, and disrespect. It answers every question your critics have raised, without you saying a word. This requires something most men aren't willing to give: time. It requires that you stay in the room long enough, work hard enough, and believe in yourself deeply enough to outlast the doubt. It requires that you stop looking for validation from the people who disrespect you and start demanding more from yourself. Frank Lloyd Wright was still designing at 90 years old. He outlasted everyone who told him he wasn't good enough. He didn't defeat his critics with words. He defeated them by becoming immortal. You have that same weapon available to you. It is called your work. It is called your discipline. It is called showing up every single day and building something that speaks for itself. So build. And if you want more content that challenges you to become the man you know you can be, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. Every week, we go deeper. Every week, we give you the tools that most men will never find. Hit subscribe and join a brotherhood of men who don't settle. Point 5. Know your worth before the room decides it for you. In 1847, Frederick Douglass stood on a stage in front of hundreds of white abolitionists, men who supposedly supported his freedom, and was told by the organization's leadership to simply tell his story. Don't analyze it. Don't argue politics. Just tell people what it felt like to be a slave. Douglass refused. He had taught himself to read in secret. He had escaped slavery. He had educated himself so thoroughly that people refused to believe he'd ever been enslaved. And now men who called themselves his allies were telling him to shrink himself, to be a symbol, not a thinker. He refused. He started his own newspaper. He wrote his own autobiography. He spoke on his own terms. He stood for Congress. He became one of the most powerful voices in American history, because he decided his worth before anyone else in the room got the chance. The fifth way to defeat disrespect is to know your own value so deeply that no one else can define it for you. This is an internal battle before it is an external one. Because the reason disrespect lands so hard, the reason it cuts so deep, is often because part of us is still uncertain about our own worth. We haven't fully settled the question in our own minds. And so when someone else raises it from the outside, we wobble. The man who knows his worth doesn't wobble. This doesn't mean arrogance. Arrogance is the performance of confidence by a man who hasn't found it yet. Real self-knowledge is quiet. It is settled. It doesn't need to announce itself, because it doesn't need to convince anyone. When you know your worth, disrespect slides off you, not because you're performing toughness, but because the insult simply doesn't find purchase. It's like throwing a stone at a mountain. The mountain doesn't move. How do you build this? You build it the same way you build anything real, brick by brick. You keep the promises you make to yourself. You do the hard thing when the easy thing is available. You study, you learn, you grow, you contribute. You build a track record inside your own mind, evidence that you are a man of substance. And then, when someone tries to tell you otherwise, you already know the answer. Frederick Douglass was told to be less. He chose to be more. Not in defiance, but in certainty. He already knew what he was. He was simply living it out loud. You already know what you are too. The question is whether you believe it deeply enough to stop letting other people's opinions tell you differently. Point 6. Let your character be your armor. Ernest Shackleton had 27 men on a ship called the Endurance in 1914, and the Antarctic ice had destroyed it. They were stranded. No radio contact. Temperatures 40 below zero. Rations running out. They were 800 miles from the nearest civilization, with no means of rescue. His men looked at him every day, exhausted, scared, on the edge of despair, and waited to see what he would do. Shackleton never lost his composure. He sang with his men at night. He gave away his rations. He stayed awake when others slept. He projected not false optimism, but something deeper, a calm certainty that they would survive this because he was going to make sure of it. When men began to doubt, Shackleton's character was the thing they held on to. Every single man survived. The sixth and final way to defeat disrespect is to build a character so solid that disrespect cannot find a crack in it. Character is your armor. And it is forged, not in comfort, but in difficulty. Every time you do the hard thing. Every time you tell the truth when lying is easier. Every time you hold your ground without losing your dignity. Every time you treat other people with respect even when they haven't earned it. You are adding another layer to an armor that no insult, no dismissal, no act of disrespect can penetrate. Here is what people who disrespect others are really looking for: weakness. A gap in your armor. A crack that they can widen. They test you to see if you'll fold. When you have character, real, earned, lived character, there is no gap. There is no crack. The test hits and bounces off. And the person testing you is left looking at their own hands, wondering what just happened. Shackleton's men didn't survive because the conditions became easier. They survived because their leader's character became the environment they lived inside. His calm became their calm. His certainty became their certainty. You don't have to lead 27 men across Antarctic ice. But you lead yourself. Every single day, in every room, in every interaction, you are demonstrating, through how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you treat people, how you respond to difficulty, exactly the kind of man you are. And the kind of man who has built genuine character needs no defense against disrespect. Because his presence alone makes it clear, this is not a man you want to try. Closing. 6 ways. Let's bring them together. First, respond, never react. Guard the space between stimulus and response like Viktor Frankl guarded his inner freedom. That space is where your power lives. Second, master strategic silence. Be like Talleyrand. Let your stillness speak louder than any comeback could. Give disrespect nothing to feed on. Third, draw clear boundaries and hold them. Be like Ollie. Know where your line is. State it plainly. And then stand exactly where you said you'd stand. Fourth, become unignorable through excellence. Be like Frank Lloyd Wright. Build so relentlessly that the argument makes itself. Outlast your critics. Let your work do the talking. Fifth, know your worth before the room decides it. Be like Frederick Douglass. Settle the question in your own mind. Own your value so completely that no one else's opinion of you has anywhere to land. And sixth, let your character be your armor. Be like Shackleton. Build something in yourself so solid that disrespect hits it and slides off. Let who you are be the ultimate answer to anyone who questions what you are. This is not a passive philosophy. This is a daily practice. It requires that you choose, every morning, in every interaction, in every difficult moment, to be the kind of man who has earned his own respect, and therefore commands the respect of others. Disrespect is not your enemy. It is a test. And every test is an opportunity to prove something, not to the person testing you, but to yourself. You are watching Inner Steel because part of you already knows this. Part of you is already building. Part of you already understands that the strongest version of yourself is not the one who explodes or collapses under pressure, but the one who stands. Now go stand. And if this video gave you something, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment below and tell me which of these 6 hit closest to home. I read every single one. Subscribe to Inner Steel if you haven't already. This is what we do here. Every week, we go deeper into the mindset, the discipline, and the philosophy that builds men who cannot be broken. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. And I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp. Stay grounded. Inner Steel.